And good evening, everyone. Welcome to Autist Circle Season 2, Episode 1. Raphael. I am the Bleach Demon, and as always, I am joined by Total Blackout Painting, known as Fat Dave, and we're getting ready to dive right in.
Hello. Yeah, we're talking about Raphael. We've gone back in time. We're going back to the High Renaissance to start over for season 2. We're going to try to keep it a little more like timeline wise. We're going to follow a timeline a bit better on this one. But anyhow, so yeah, this season today we're going to be talking about Raphael, the famous Renaissance painter, who is let me mute that. Okay, there we go. So we'll start off with the timeline here. Of course, we're at the very beginning. And you can see he was his life straddled the Reformation. And he has 2 birthdays, which is weird because this was also during the time when they were switching from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. But there's a little bit of mythos around his birthday. But anyhow, so we'll get on to the art timeline here. So he was one of the most iconic painters of the High Renaissance and one of the most well-known artists of all time. There's very few people today that even don't know the name Raphael, and whether that's because they know of the Ninja Turtles or not, then they still know his name. And almost everybody has seen his paintings at some point. And throughout a short life, he made paintings that were so iconic they're often used today. And his contemporaries included iconic artists like Michelangelo and Vinci. And his works are still on display in numerous cathedrals and museums. His work is the definition of what many believe to be classical art, and his influence could not be understated. And although his works are not all as emotionally religious as his Florentine and Venetian counterparts, they still fall in line with the religious iconography of the time for their precise depictions of his scenes. And his sudden unfortunate death left many works incomplete that would later be completed by others, like Titian. I think we talked about Titian completing a few of Raphael's paintings or a few of his commissions. So, jumping into the man here. Raffaello Sanzio da Urbino was born on March 28th in the Julian calendar or April 6th on the Gregorian calendar. In 1483 in Urbino, Italy, to Giovanni Santi and Magia di Battista Ciarla. I messed that up. His father was a court painter to the Duke of Urbino. He was also a poet and a chronicler for the court of the Duke, where art was treated as an intellectual pursuit as opposed to a trade, as we've seen with many other artists like Rubens and that. And his mother came from a wealthy family, merchant family. So the city of Urbino was small, but it was a highly cultured court, and it was kind of at the center. It was at the center of humanist thought at the time, and not like the secular humanism that's God denying, but you know, more of the enlightening of the human soul. They focus more on art and history and culture as opposed to the more religious cities of Venice and Rome, where they were kind of slavishly religious. They were religious, but they weren't like completely devoted to it in the same way. This afforded Raphael childhood centered around intellectual pursuits like the philosophy, art, and architecture, which would serve him greatly throughout his whole life. And his young life was marked by loss, as his mother died at 8, and his father died when he was 11. But Raphael had been training in his father's workshop, you know, prior to his father's death. And by the time his father died, he was already treated as a professional artist, and he inherited his father's workshop connections. You know, he was well integrated into the society. People knew him. They knew, you know, they felt the tragedy of his parents passing as well. uh, that he faced the loss of his parents with stoicism, and scholars believed it drove him further into the stability and harmony of his works, and really embedded that into him. After the
Hmm.
passing of his parents, he was placed with Pietro Perugino uh, to apprentice after his father's death. And this is where he learned to do frescoes and panel paintings. And he learned to emphasize symmetry and idealize the serene figures.
That is a lot to deal with by age 11.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really like to be kind of thrust into the professional life without like without a parent to guide him through. Um
Yeah,
so
that is wild. It really is.
right. I'll talk about that LGM how he died when we get to it. So in his late 20s, and this is a an image of Pietro Perugino. By the age of 17, he was already taking independent commissions, and he was no longer being treated as a young apprentice, but as a full professional. And we've seen that in other, like Rembrandt was pretty much his own artist at 19, running his own shop by the time he was 19, and so it just
Hmm.
seems like people matured a little earlier then, mostly by necessity, and especially him by necessity.
Absolutely.
So his first commissions come from Urbino connected patrons and nobles, and they were relatively conservative altarpieces and devotionals. But he was really sought after for his non-controversial theological clarity, uh, and his subjects were immediate, clear, and unambiguous. People understood exactly what his paintings were about without having to, suss it out too hard.
Hmm.
And as a young artist, that made him incredibly popular with the Urbino nobles and across all of Italy. So, contrary to other artists at the time, like Michelangelo, Raphael was seen as an incredibly reliable artist, and he was often called in to complete works started by other artists. He was commissioned to finish a few of Michelangelo's paintings and stuff like that, and to other
That's
artists.
absolutely wild.
R-
Just to be able to kind of mimic others' talents that as well as you have that reputation.
Right?
That is incredible.
Well, and we'll come to learn that he ended up defining the style for a lot of the Renaissance work and a lot of the paintings of the time. In 1504, he moved to Florence, and that's where he first encountered the works of Da Vinci and Michelangelo. And he studied and absorbed their works obsessively, and he learned to integrate like Michelangelo's distinct musculature and body styles, and then Da Vinci's other compositional techniques. He really learned to integrate those into his own and make him into his own kind of his own style. And
Hmm.
by the age of 25, he was widely known across all of central Italy. And he becomes a sought after artist by many church and private patrons. And eventually, this led to him being summoned to Rome by the Pope. So the Pope at the time summoned him to Rome um, to do work, which of course was a big deal because um, of course, this was
Kind of the center
after
of the
the
Western world.
right, exactly, and this was after the Reformation, or after Martin Luther's proclamation, I should say, or his 95 thesis.
Yeah, the diet of worms.
Yes, and and so again, like we've talked about previously, the church was in full like we need to push the culture, we need to push the church, we need to push back against the Protestants. The church was in full swing trying to do that, but at the same time, the you know the church was still marked by excess and a little I don't know, maybe a little hubris by some of the popes. But
Oh, definitely.
the pope had a lot of power then too, right? Like I mean, the pope was the de facto ruler of a lot of them. Like pretty much what he said
In the
goes.
sense, right? There's always going to be trials and tribulations, but at that time, yeah, the word from Rome was considered the word of God to a lot of people,
Yeah,
rightly or wrongly.
yeah, absolutely. So in 1508, he was summoned to Rome by Pope Julius II, who was known as the warrior pope, because they they had wars like for the papal states, and he was heavily involved in that. And of course, this was monumental for a 25-year-old, and he was the youngest major artist at the time. Standing amongst the giants of like Michelangelo and Donato Baramonte, who painted St. Peter's Basilica. He did a lot of work in there, which he died untimely, and Raphael ended up completing a lot of uh, Bramante's work. So Raphael was entrusted with several large rooms of symbolic importance in a couple of places. The biggest one was in the Stanza della Segnaturia in the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican. It's hard to say some of those words. And these rooms were intended for legal proceedings and papal libraries. And this is where the School of Athens resides. And I've got a picture of the room on the screen here that shows two of the four walls in this room. Each wall has a different painting. Of course, today we're only going to talk about the School of Athens later. But this is that School of Athens really became it's an iconic work, and it was such an iconic work at the time because it showed off his ability to capture kind of the spirit of Rome, and it became his signature in a way. So, within a few years of his arrival, he became a major player in the art world of Rome, and he replaced older artists on commissions like Michelangelo. And he oversaw the creation of multiple frescoes simultaneously. His workshop was expansive and very, very important. And he was considered indispensable by the papal court. Of course, his polite and professional demeanor helped him establish many political connections and allowed him to expand his influence kind of across more than just Rome or more than just Italy. He was always thought to be a very courtly person, right? Like
Mhm.
he was raised in the courts and was influenced by that greatly, and always maintained kind of a dignified air in a way. So by his early 30s, he had become Rome's preferred artist for many people, and he ran one of the largest workshops in Italy, overseeing massive projects and efficiently managing many assistants to shape the tastes of Europe. So his work wasn't just a sought after artist, but he was a trendsetter at the time.
Mhm.
He set the standard in a lot of ways for Renaissance art and for Rome or art in Rome at that time.
Hmm.
So got a wood cutting here. This is a wood cutting based on a portrait by Raphael of Pope Julius II. So after the death of Bramante in 1514, Raphael is appointed the chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica, which was an exceptional honor for someone in their early 30s. He was charged with designing buildings, supervising excavations, and advising on Rome's ancient monuments on what they should do with stuff. Because Rome's a really ancient city.
Yeah, that's amazing.
For someone in their early 30s, that's just mind blowing. And for him to take over for Beaumonte, who was not incredibly young when he died, but he took over that position from a much older artist. So uh, during this time, his artwork kind of changed subtly to show more crowded scenes, and a stronger use of contrast and emotion with a little bit more chaos mixed in, as opposed to his normal earlier works that were really streamlined and harmonious, which is a word I'll end up fucking using a lot here. He also
I mean, if it fits, it fits.
it kind of does, yeah. So he maintained a successful workshop during those years, and he trained apprentices, designed and corrected compositions, and cultivated a stable of highly trusted assistants to maintain stylistic unity. And we talked about, I think it was in, I think it may have been no, it wasn't Caravaggio. There was one of the Baroque artists we talked about who trained under someone who apprenticed to Raphael, which was really his claim to fame. Was that
Was it Titian?
No, I don't think it was Titian.
No.
Because Titian was well, he came along after Raphael died, but or he rose to prominence well after Raphael died. But I think or maybe it was Titian. Shit. No, I think you're right. I think it was Titian.
Okay, yeah, I thought there was some connection that we briefly touched on.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Titian was charged with completing some of Raphael's paintings, but then also, yeah, I believe you're right. He apprenticed with someone who was one of Raphael's apprentices. So he was really the style setter at the time, really working to maintain a homogeneous art style or push a homogeneous art style throughout the empire, the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, at the time, to be able to clearly and quickly communicate the image of the painting and to unify the iconography so that you could put something in one painting to another painting and people would understand what that iconography meant across multiple works. So on April 6, 1520, he dies suddenly at the age of 37, which historians kind of mark that as the death of the end of the High Renaissance period of art. And the ripples of his death would fracture the art world and usher in movements like Mannerism and eventually would lead to the Baroque movement. Of course, Rome reacted with the typical theatrical grief, and his body was displayed beside his final work for a number of days before he was eventually interred in the Pantheon with kings and emperors. So his cause of death, as chronicled by a historian, was, as LGM says in the chat, they thought it was because he had too much sex, and then he got a fever, and then they bloodlet him, because they treated a lot of shit with bloodletting then, and that eventually led to his death.
Yeah, have to balance the humors,
right? But that's considered to be kind of embellished history. There's no medical records to claim that, which they had medical records of things at the time. I mean, they have,
especially if he's at Rome and in the Vatican,
right?
Because there's going to be a lot of, hey, have to check up all these rumors, things like that. So
right, yeah. So they don't have any firm records saying that he died of plague or cholera, of typhus, or any of that shit. It's just that he had a high fever and then suddenly died. So an incredibly amazing and short life. He died really at the peak of his fame, which was a bit of a tragedy. It would be really interesting to see, much like Titian's works later in life, as they evolved, and a lot of the other artists we've talked about whose works later in life evolved and grew. It would have been really amazing to see what Raphael would have eventually came up with, because what he did produce was, again, so iconic and clean and harmonious that it could have only gotten better as he aged.
Well, and it would also be fascinating to see, and we've looked at some of these artists, like their last great painting,
right?
And just how, with Titian, the failing eyesight, or Yeah, some of these other great artists where there's just something kind of an impending doom,
right?
in a sense, in some of them.
Right. So in a way, Caravaggio's life is like the mirror opposite of Raphael's, because Caravaggio had
Hmm.
a very raucous and brash life, as to where Raphael's life was marked by, you know, courtliness and aristocratic, like an aristocratic court circles. He
Hmm.
was not um, he was not rude or brash, and his works really have a much more a softer and harmonious and clean edge to them. So, with that being said, we'll jump into the first painting here, which
Which
is
is
this.
always one of my personal favorites.
This
From
is
when I was a small child,
Yeah,
I always loved the depiction of Saint George and the Dragon.
it's a cool story. Um, so again, yes, this is Saint George and the Dragon, and this was painted between 1504 and 1506, and it's an oil on a wood panel, and this one's pretty small. It's about the size of a sheet of paper,
Hmm.
8.5 by 11. It's 28.5 centimeters by 21.5 centimeters, and it's currently located in the Louvre.
Hmm.
So the story of Saint George, I'll just go over uh, a quick overview of it. So Cylene in Libya is terrorized by a dragon that lives in a nearby marsh or lake, depending on the telling of the story. And to keep it appeased, the people of the city were offering it animals, and then eventually started offering it people. And eventually, the king's daughter is chosen as the offering, and she is led out of the city to be sacrificed. And Saint George, who is a Christian knight and Roman soldier, rides past and encounters the princess. Um, and finds out what's going on. And so he makes a sign of the cross and confronts and wounds the dragon with his lance. And he subdues the dragon. And so there's various stories on this. Some of them are that the dragon is led back by a rope tied around the princess's waist, is one of the variations. So he subdues the dragon, and he tells the people of Silene that he will kill the dragon if they convert to Christianity. And the city agrees, and he kills the dragon, and thousands of people were baptized, and a temple was built on the site. So that's the story of Saint George and the Dragon, and the story that's depicted here is of George, Saint George, wounding the dragon with his lance. So and again, this is what I say. His work is very clean and clear. There's no real ambiguity about what's going on here. Obviously, you can see the dragon.
Mhm.
You can see I think the interesting thing is the horse's face looking back at us. Um,
Yeah, that is a very interesting feature. But I've seen that depicted in other paintings of Saint George and the Dragon, where it's like the horses engage the viewer while all this other action is going on, and
right,
that is something else I'd like to really make note of. It's an action scene. It's there's no static. Okay, it's like the medieval rabbit shooting an arrow at a snail kind of thing.
right,
There is action in this.
yeah. And Saint George is depicted in he's got a very serene look on his face, and he's got a halo, of course, to denote the
Hmm.
sainthood. And then even the princess is depicted um, in the back with she's in a very pious manner praying with a halo on her head.
Hmm.
And you see the city in the background is supposed to be the tower that's supposed to be Silene, or this, the fabled city. It's not exactly clear what what city it is, but it is but I mean, in the legend isn't, it's
Yeah,
thought to be Silene in Libya, but it's not always that, because it is a legend, and
it sometimes it's moved into Turkey or what's was what, Scythia. Just various places where it just fits the mold of what the story that needs to be told.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a mythology. I mean, a mythologizing of the story.
Yep.
Oh, welcome in, Fab Daddy. So it's a very well done wood on or oil on wood, and again, it shows the action and the very. Uh, I think it's a very good. Like the proportions are good for the most part. The horse looks a little weird, but it is again, it's an action scene. And it keeps that Renaissance aesthetic of a light background with trees and all that stuff. They love doing all that stuff in the Renaissance.
Yep. Well, and one other thing I really like about this particular version is you can see some veins on the horse's face. The nostrils are flared, so there's some detail there. It's a little weird, but there's detail there.
Yeah.
But then also you have like leaves in the trees and the bushes.
Yeah.
It's just it's nice little details like that. It's subtle, but it's
Yeah.
there, and it kind of draws you into the main figure.
Right. It's got like happy little trees in the background. It's but really,
Raphael was Bob Ross. It made
right?
sense.
But right at the center of the painting is the horse looking back at you, acknowledging the viewer while George uh, bravely takes the triumphs or wounds the dragon, and the whole thing is just an allegory for the triumph of virtue over evil. Um, that's the heart of the Saint George slaying the dragon is just the triumph of good and virtue over the evil. So with that, um, let's go ahead and jump into the next one, which is the big one. And this is the School of Athens. And as LGM pointed out in the chat earlier, it is a huge painting. It's a very big, it's a big room, and this painting is gigantic. Of course, massive fresco. It's 16 feet by 25 feet, or 500 centimeters by 700 centimeters. And it's located in Stanza della Segnatura, Apostolic Palace in the Vatican. And this was commissioned by Pope Julius II, and it's part of a 4-wall program representing theology, philosophy, poetry, and law. And this is, of course, the philosophy painting in that. And there's a lot going on here, but it is it's very direct. But there's there's a lot going on, but it has a very central theme. So, of course, in the very center is Plato and Aristotle as the central figures. But the painting also contains Socrates, Pythagoras, Archimedes, Heraclitus, Averroes, Euclid, Zarathustra, Hypatia. There's just a ton of people, and Ptolemy. There's a lot of people included in this painting. And if you look down in the lower right-hand corner,
There
you'll
he
see.
is, the little weasel.
Yep, he self-inserted himself, and he's meant to be standing next to Ptolemy. The guy in the white is meant to be Ptolemy. Of course, Socrates is above them. But there's some things in this painting, like this image here of the scribe writing in a book. That image there has been pulled out, isolated, and put on things like album covers, music album covers.
Oh yeah.
That image itself has been used in other places. And one thing I think that's really neat about this painting is that this is all painted. It's a flat wall. Of course, near the ceiling, it's not. It's decorated differently, but this is a flat wall, painted with this 3-dimensional image, including all the little tiny frescoes down at the bottom and the painting of the statues, the Romanesque statues. So it's meant to kind of symbolize, or it was meant to symbolize the continuity of ancient philosophy through to contemporary Christianity at that time. And that's one of the reasons why the Pope wanted it to further lend itself to the lend credibility to the church by maintaining a long lineage within it.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a natural choice in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
So there's only two characters in the painting that are actually looking out of the painting, and that is, of course, Raphael over on the left, and the other is Hypatia, the female. She's the female philosopher on the right hand side.
Actually,
Every
I would also say there's two more characters, like the little cherub, and also some little. Well, they might not be
oh
looking at the viewer, but
yeah,
it's like.
there's the
But
little
I don't think
child
they're
over
of
there.
import.
Yeah, there's the little child over here. That's true. Um, but everybody else is engaged. It's a busy scene, but it's a busy scene showing a lot of um, like they're engaged in mathematics, they're engaged in philosophy, they're engaged in debate. And if you look at Archimedes, or if you look at Plato and Aristotle, Plato is pointing upwards and he's holding a book by Timaeus, and Aristotle is reaching out towards the viewer and he's holding Nicomachean Ethics, is the book that he's meant to be holding. The architecture in the painting is inspired by Rome, and the arches kind of draw you towards the center of the work where the debate is happening. And along the steps show knowledge is structured and hierarchical, and really that truth is in the center of everything. The debate held by these guys is it's a dialectic meant to come to the truth, meant to reach the truth. And in a room where they are trying to where they held court services in this room, like hearings and stuff. So that would be it would be a powerful symbol if they're saying we're using a dialectic to get to the truth. We want the truth. And then also tying that truth back into the church to say, the church is truth in a way. So the other, I mean, this is worth looking up on your own. Anybody who's listening, the the other four walls are pretty cool, but this is the biggest one by far. So the way you can tell what the books are, it says ethics on Aristotle's book, which the prime book on ethics back then was the Nicomachean Ethics. And then you can look and see that this book says Timaeus on the side. So that's how he can tell what books he's holding. And of course,
that's really clever.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's all sorts of so here they're holding globes representing the earth and the sky. So they weren't flat earthers. They did believe in a round earth. Of course, that was something ancient Greece they knew about in ancient Greece. And of course, these guys are doing geometry using the compass there. There's all sorts of intellectual pursuits being done in this painting, again, meant to symbolize how the rigorous debate and everything that went into the church. So I'm just going to take a second because the Roman arches in here are really cool. It's super well done. It looks three-dimensional, for it to be painted on a giant wall. I would imagine this would be very amazing to see in person and very imposing as well. Something that really draws you in, because some of these figures are almost life-size because the painting is so large.
I would just be blown away to see this and see these figures at almost full scale. Just that's amazing. And so, something else, we rattled on about with a lot of the other artists is look at the fabric. It's a very natural laying fabric for a lot of these individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. He did a. I mean, it has that signature Renaissance style, which it doesn't have the darkness, the dark realism that we see later in the Baroque era. Of course, they do look realistic, but they definitely look like a painting.
Yeah.
And again, yeah, the cloth is really well done. And it's individual characters. Each individual character is doing something different, which is probably why it took a couple of years to paint it.
I can't imagine why. It's just, go down the photocopier and throw this on the wall. It'll be
Yeah,
fine.
right. So with that, we'll move on to the next one, which is the Sistine Madonna. So this was
Hmm.
painted between 1512 and 1513, and it's oil on canvas. It is 8 feet 8 inches by uh, 6.5 feet, or 265
Yeesh.
centimeters by 196 centimeters. And it's currently housed in the Old Masters Gallery in Dresden, and it's been there since the 17th century. It's been there for a long time,
Surprised it survived.
right? So this was commissioned by Pope Julius for a church of San Sisto, the Church of San Sisto in Piacenza. And Sistine does not talk about the chapel. Sistine is actually a reference to Saint Sixtus. And
Hmm.
Saint Sixtus was connected to Julius II's family lineage, and this painting was a way for him to cement his family legacy. Uh, so while the School of Athens is kind of like his intellectual manifesto, because it has so many little callbacks and little things, it's like, oh, that's really smart. That's really smart. This is really kind of his religious one in a way at the time. Uh, it shows Mary stepping forward as opposed to being enthroned, which was a slight departure from the popular styles at the time. And the Christ child has a knowing look on his eyes, kind of representing foreknowledge over innocence and presence. So he's showing,
Hmm.
like, he's kind of looking at you like, oh, buddy.
Like,
You have
hey,
no
you're a
idea what's
sinner,
coming.
but I know what I'm going to do for you.
Right, right. So behind Mary, and this is something that's kind of cool, is you don't notice it when you first look at it, but the clouds behind her are all cherub faces. It's a bunch of obscured faces of cherubs, which let's see, and it's meant to
If you zoom
symbolize,
in, it's actually harder to see them.
yeah, in this image, and that I had to take a smaller resolution image off of Wikipedia too, because they have one that's just another one of those giant ones where it's like you zoom in and you can look at the speck in the eye up close. Of course, when you zoom in, you can see the slight halos over Jesus and Mary, which is not as easy to see far away. Of course, you see this halo on Saint Sixtus here, and then this is Saint Barbara, and she's got a little bit of a halo too. So Saint
Hmm.
Sixtus, of course, I mentioned, is on the left, and he's pointing to the viewer, kind of he's breaking the space up in a way, more drawing you in. And of course, uh, the baby Jesus is looking at the viewer. He's looking out at the people, and
Hmm.
he had to he had to. Gosh, I freaking lost my train of thought. Um, Get back to my notes here. So this is Saint Barbara on the left or on the right, looks down in quiet contemplation, and she's representing kind of humility and acceptance of the sainthood of Mary. And of course, the cherubs at the bottom down here. Everybody has seen these cherubs. Try to zoom in on them. This image of the cherubs is iconic, and it's one of the most reproduced images in all of Western art. Of course,
Hmm.
it's on all sorts of little kitschy things, but it's been used on album covers. It's been used on the plaques that you get at Hobby Lobby. It's been on T-shirts. It's an incredibly iconic image, and when I first ran across this painting, um, that was when I was like, "Oh shit, that's where those come from."
Oh,
You know?
that's kind of wild.
It's kind of like when you're watching a show and it gets to a frame where there's a meme you recognize, and you're like, "Oh shit,
Yeah.
I know that meme." And so you see this
Wait, it
painting,
didn't
you're like,
come out
"Oh
of
shit,
nowhere?
right, I know those little guys." So it's like if you go back and watch the SpongeBob movie or SpongeBob SquarePants, and you'll see all the different SpongeBob memes in there. And it kind of makes you, to reference another meme. It's like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he whistles and points it to, like when he sees himself on the TV and he whistles and snaps and points. It makes me feel
Hmm.
like that every time I see something like in one of these images, and that's how this made me feel too. So they kind of they look a little impatient.
Hmm.
Which in a way mirrors human experience with the divine, as people are often just waiting for the divine to happen, impatiently. They're not always engaged piously or studiously with the divine, or
Hmm.
with religion. And these guys are kind of a reflection of that.
One other just fascinating note. So on the left-hand side under Sixtus is the papal tiara, just as a reference to his earthly status as one of the many popes.
Yeah.
There's like 5 or 6 Sixtuses.
And this version is cropped a little bit. That is more prominent in other versions, as is the other side of the curtains. I think this is just the image I found. It's the one they have on Wikipedia, so it's the one I used because that's usually the easiest one to find. But yeah, that papal urn is more prominent in other versions of it.
Hmm.
So all in all, like, and the cloth and everything, especially the gold cloth on Saint Sixtus, like I think he did a really good job of the papal robes on Sixtus.
Oh yeah, having the embroidery actually be somewhat visible, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. And this is another, I mean, it's a huge painting, which would be somewhat imposing to see in real life, which is somewhat awe-inspiring, of course, which is what they want a lot of this work to do, is inspire awe and
Hmm.
uh, religious feelings and you know kind of instill the divine within the viewer. And I think it does a great job of that. And again, I'll say it again, it's a really harmonious piece. It's very well put together. There's nothing like crazy or abrupt in it. Everything flows together really nicely. It's a very good encapsulation of Raphael's style. So
It's interesting. There's also kind of like a very soft focus in a way with a lot of it.
yeah, yeah, which was again one of kind of it's not like hard edges, right? Even
Hmm.
everything looks very clean and smooth and warm. He did a good job making that bridging that gap for the viewer. You know,
Yeah.
helping you overcome the jarring nature of trying to figure out what something looks like. This is very clear. It's very plain. and very well composed and well put together. So, with that, we'll jump over to the next one, which is a very dramatic shift in subject matter. But this is the portrait of Baldassare Castiglione. This is an oil on canvas. It's not super huge. It's 32 by 26 inches or 82 centimeters by 63 centimeters. And it is currently located at the Louvre. So the backstory on this guy is Baldassare Castiglione was a diplomat, a courtier, and an author who wrote the Book of the Courtier, or the Courtier, which defined the ideals of Renaissance humanism and Renaissance humanist thought at the time. It was the book was foundational to the court culture of European. It was kind of like, you can kind of think of it like the Miss Manners book of its time. He
Ah,
he,
yes.
he wrote about what a courtly or stately person should be, or how they should act, and he was taken very seriously. Like Miss Manners was kind of, he's it's a style guide for how people of authority should act. And it was taken to heart by a lot of people. And he was part of the same court and intellectual circles as Raphael. They were friends and peer. They weren't necessarily like, or they were peers, but they were friends, and they ran in the same circles. So this the painting is thought to embody Castiglione's ideals, which were later codified in his book. Grace without effort, intellectual depth, while maintaining Raphael's signature calm and harmonious style. The palette's subdued and dignified. There's no ostentatious color displays and no grand adornment or excess. He doesn't have gold. He doesn't have gold woven into his clothing. He doesn't have golden papal robes. He doesn't have a large gold chain or anything on him. Of course, you can kind of see maybe the hilt of a dagger or something, or maybe a brooch, but that's about it.
Mhm.
There's no gaudiness to it.
Yeah, it's very much a sharp contrast between some of the other paintings that we've looked through, as far as the more vibrant colors and the more bold action. This is very much a man sitting for a portrait, and that's obvious, but it's just a very distinct shift,
right? And this wasn't like a commission. This guy didn't come to Raphael and pay him. It was more Raphael just painted him as a friend, and a fellow member of the court. So there's no surviving records of a commission if it was commissioned. So that's how it's viewed through history. It's just a painting of a friend by a friend. So of course
that's actually really cool.
I think so. Of course, the subject is looking at the viewer in a calm and dignified way that's measured and unguarded with no bravado. So he really kind of embodied what he was saying in his book. He was embodying what a stately person or a courtly person should be, in that calm and reserved and thoughtful. And and this is by historians, this is widely considered to be the perfect Renaissance portrait, showing the ideal nobleman at the time, and it is the cornerstone of the Louvre's Renaissance portraits. So, if anybody wants to, or if I ever get a chance to brave Paris, to go, I'll put on my nose plugs and go to the Louvre. I would love to see this painting in up close and in person.
The Louvre, if it wasn't in Paris, would be very, very high on my list, just to see this art. And Also, Charlemagne and Charles Martel's graves, but that's
Yeah.
neither here nor there.
But some of the detail he captures in this is really great, like the individual strands of hair in the beard, the lighter hair around the mouth as it would, as most beards are.
Yeah.
He does a great job of capturing a very realistic portrait of his friend, and so that's why I picked it, because I thought it was a really good encapsulation of that. And so, with that being said, we will jump to his last painting. And this is literally his last painting. This is the final painting he worked on when he died. Um, or he was, and he completed it before he died with the help of assistants. Well, he had assistants helped him throughout the whole thing, but I think there's been a couple of figures that have been identified as being painted by his assistants, but by and large, this is considered to be an entire a complete Raphael creation. So this is painted from 1516 to 1520, and it's oil on panel, but it was later transferred to canvas. It's huge. It's 13 feet 3 inches by 9 feet 1 inch, or 405 by 278 centimeters. It's currently in the Vatican's Pinacoteca Vaticana museum. And this was once considered to be the most famous painting in the entire world. Probably for good reason. So it was originally commissioned by Cardinal Guino de' Medici, who would later become Pope Clement II. And it was intended for the Narbonne Cathedral. I'm saying that probably wrong. Narbonne Cathedral in France. And it was an international commission meant to assert papal authority and artistic hegemony and homogeneity throughout the Catholic world. The painting never made it there, though. The cardinal retained the painting and had it installed in Blessed Amadeo's Church of San Pietro in Montorio in Rome. And it's the anniversary of the Diet of Worms. That's funny.
Yeah. I was thinking about that when we started talking about this. Like, this is that. This is the big,
very timely. Yeah. So now this is a somewhat departure, and it shows an evolution of his style, in that it's separated into two scenes, like two kind of somewhat separate scenes. Of course, at the top you have Christ, who is flanked by Moses and Elijah, while Saint John and John the Saint James, Apostle James and John the Baptist look on. And this is Mount Tabor. And of course, Christ is wreathed in a pure white light, symbolizing the divinity or the divine clarity. And the lower section shows the apostles failing to cure an afflicted child, and they're awaiting Christ's return, which is a biblical story. The youth is, and this is kind of meant to show the process of the healing in the process of the healing, or I guess that's the sentence. It shows the healing in process. The child, the kid, he's no longer laying on the ground, seizing and convulsing. But he's on his feet and his mouth is open, which is meant to symbolize the departure of the demonic spirit from him. So, of course, we can see the apostles. A couple of the apostles are gesturing towards the transfigured Christ, while a lot of people are paying attention to the child, right? It's a very busy scene, and it could be its own separate painting, and it's thought to be loosely based on other paintings of Lazarus, of Christ healing Lazarus. So, and this is his final painting. and he joins the two scenes together as a testament to the healing power of the transfigured Christ.
Hmm.
So, and this painting has some interesting history because in 1797, it was captured in the Napoleonic Wars and taken back to Paris and installed in the Louvre until 1815, when they repatriated a lot of the art that was confiscated by Napoleon. A lot of that art was repatriated back to the Vatican, which really kind of shows how powerful the church was at the time then too. Um, because the
Yes,
church was,
and also a lot of the undoing of Napoleon.
yeah, yeah. So the church was able to assert its authority in such a way that they were able to get these works back, these spoils
Mm.
of war back, and of course the total shitting on of Napoleon
Yeah, yeah,
by the
exactly.
Italians. So this was his final painting, and this is the painting where his body was kept. His body was displayed by this painting for, I think, about a week before he was interred. But much like Titian's work, the Pieta, where he wanted that to be on his tomb. Of course, Raphael didn't see that he was going to die. He wasn't able to make those kind of plans, and so it was kind of made for him that he was displayed by near this painting, which, like I said, was considered to be the most famous painting of the Renaissance era for a very long time. It was one of the most widely known paintings, which is, it's interesting in an era without the internet, or without
Yeah, yeah.
telephones or anything like that. There's no means for mass communication, but this painting was incredibly well known because of the masters at the time studied it and looked at it, um, and drew inspiration from it. And then also, you know, the church patrons and stuff also drew a lot of inspiration from it. And it is so huge and imposing that it's another one of those things where it would kind of draw you in because it is such a large painting.
I mean, it's just remarkable the scale of this painting. It just
Yeah,
I can't fathom it. Just seeing it on this small screen and wait, it's that big?
right. Yeah, I
That
know.
freaking big?
13 feet. Like it's a big painting. And especially for it to be a
Yeah.
painting and not a fresco. You know,
Hmm.
that's a gigantic thing. It's a giant piece of canvas. Um or even a
Yeah.
giant piece of wood. This is a really big painting, which is probably why people were so inspired by it at the time.
Oh yeah. It's hard not to be when you encounter something of this magnitude.
Yeah. And so with that, I think we're coming close to our hour. We've got a couple more minutes here.
Mm. Yeah.
That's all that's all I've got to say. Do you have a few words to add here, Bleach, before we
I
wrap
think
up?
I've prattled on as much as I possibly can. I just really also fascinated with the realism in like the portrait versus as far as like the face and the features
Mhm.
versus some of the broader, you know, like facial features of like this and the School of Athens. And I almost wonder if that's from centuries of preservation and age that are making them less sharp, or he just spent that much time on his friend just
Yeah.
as a, you know, hey, I'm going to go and do this extra detail here because it's a private portrait rather than a mass portrait.
Right. Yeah. And so that's been Raphael. Thank you guys for showing up for our first episode of the second season. I don't know if we'll be back next week or the week after. I think there might be some things holding up for next week. But the next episode will be Bruegel the Elder, the Flemish master
Ooh.
who was similar to Bosch, but not contemporary to him. So anyhow, that's what I've got, and we'll see you next week, folks.
Indeed. Go out and reclaim your art.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Cheers.